In today's art and math tour, we are going to talk about shapes. There are shapes all around us, and as an element of design, shapes are one of the building blocks of art. And in math, shapes give us a way of understanding the world around us. We define a shape as the outline or surface object. In a moment, I'll ask you to pause the video and spend some time looking at this painting by Viola Depew. It is called Close to the City, and it is actually a painting of downtown Hamilton. I like this painting because it shows us how one artist sees shapes in the buildings and details of the city. She has used those shapes to make a colorful and interesting painting. Work with your family to see how many different shapes you can find. Point them out, draw them, or even make a list. Take turns seeing if you can find something that no one else has noticed. Pause the video for a moment so that you have some time to look. And when you're done, you can restart the video and we'll see how you did. Shapes can be two-dimensional or flat, like a square, triangle, or circle. They can be three-dimensional or fill an amount of space, like a cube, a pyramid, or a sphere. We often call 3D shapes forms to distinguish them from 2D shapes, but they are still kind of a shape. Now let's see how you did in this painting. I see lots of different 2D shapes that were used to create the buildings. I see rectangles and triangles in the walls and roofs of the building. I also see more squares and rows. Did you notice what shapes are used to make the houses? If you start with a square and put a triangle on top of it, then you have a house. Some of the rooftops are also a special four-sided shape called a parallelogram, where two opposite sides run parallel or in the same direction, the same distance apart, and the two opposite sides are also parallel but in another direction. When I look a little more closely, I see that the artist has made her city look three-dimensional. I see cubes, rectangular prisms, cones, and even pyramids. In art, shape can sometimes be both 2D and 3D at the same time. A drawing on a flat surface of paper is two-dimensional, but an artist can use color and shading and lines in careful directions to make them look three-dimensional. We call this the illusion of form. The clever use of light and dark fools our eye into seeing there. But this is not really a trick so much as it is done by careful observation, by looking closely at an object and its shadows and highlights, and then recreating exactly what we see on paper. Take a look at this painting by Bertram Brooker. As we spend time looking together, pause the video so you have time to share what you find. Once again, what shapes do you see? How many shapes did you find? Are there any shapes that are different from the others? I see a lot of circles, or half circles, in shades of gray and black. I also see 3 long rectangles at the bottom that look kind of like steps, a square or diamond shape, and a thin vertical line. All of these are 2D shapes. There is another shape that looks different. It has a shadow on its right side that gradually gets darker, and it looks like it's sticking right out of the painting. This is a 3D shape called a sphere. Even though it looks like we could almost pick it up, the canvas that this shape is on is actually just as flat as the rest. The artist has tricked us into seeing the illusion of 3 dimensions, length, width, and height. Something that all of these shapes have in common, name them all: circle, rectangle, sphere. They are a kind of special shape called geometric. Geometric shapes can be different sizes, and their proportions, that is, the relationship between their sides, can be different, but they always have specific characteristics, which means that they follow certain rules. For example, the rule for a square is that it always has 4 sides that are the same length, and the rule for a triangle is that it always has 3 sides. Geometric shapes usually have straight edges, other than the circle, but its edge still follows a very strict rule. They also have sharp corners and seem artificial or made by mechanical means. In this painting, we see another shape that we haven't yet talked about. Can you name it? Does it seem different than the rest? The shape that I'm talking about is this curvy shape that you see behind the sphere. We can talk about wavy lines and curves, but they are not geometric shapes. It doesn't seem to follow any rules, and we may never see another shape that is quite like this one again. There are lots of shapes like this in the world around us. This kind of shape is called an organic shape, which means that it reminds us of things from nature, often with curving lines and unusual outlines. In this painting by Paul-Émile Bourgeois, we see a great example of organic shapes used in an abstract painting. We see shapes in different colors and sizes, made up of curvy outlines, and not really representing anything we can quite recognize. To me, this painting looks alive in some ways, and I imagine the objects being a bit soft and squishy. That is because of the shapes. As we said before, organic shapes look like things in the natural world, things that are alive. What do you think about when you look at this painting? It is easy to talk about shapes in abstract paintings like the ones we've just looked at. But as we saw in the beginning, shapes are everywhere around us. When artists are drawing, sometimes they imagine the things they see as simple shapes to help them get the picture just right, and then they may add the details later. If we look at this landscape painting by Lauren Harris, we can see this process. There are shapes in the trees, the hills, the clouds, and the shadows. What kind of shapes are they? If you said organic, you are right. Everything in this picture is part of the natural world, so it makes sense that the artist used natural or organic shapes. This makes the picture look more alive and more real. What about in this landscape? What shapes do you see? Are they organic or geometric? This one is a bit trickier, but I'd still say mostly organic shapes. We see curving hills and clouds, and the icebergs are still unusual shapes. But if you look closely, you can also see the artist is thinking about geometric shapes too, especially in some of the blue icebergs. I like this comparison between the last one and this because this painting is by the same artist, but it is made a few years later. His style or his way of drawing has changed a little bit. Does this place look alive and comfortable, or is it starting to look more artificial? Again, that is all because of the shapes. Guess what? This painting is by Lauren Harris too, a few years after the last one. What do you think about the shapes used in this painting? Organic or geometric? Point out some of the shapes that you see. This time, I'd say there are mostly geometric shapes. I can see lots of circles, triangles, and rectangles. I still see a few organic shapes too, interesting curves and wavy lines here and there, just enough to remind me a little bit of the artist's earlier landscapes. Some of the colors he's chosen to use remind me of his earlier work too. This painting does not seem natural or alive to me. Instead, it feels more artificial and more about ideas and less about the real world. I can imagine him working on this with a ruler and other mathematical tools to get the lines and the shapes just right. Lauren Harris is a great artist to look at because his style changed several times during his career as an artist. This is because the things he was interested in changed, and new styles were better suited to new ideas. He started with landscapes in the forests and provincial parks, then moved on to places that seemed colder, where he could use more mathematical approach. In the end, he was done with landscape altogether, and he focused only on shapes and colors. Shapes really are everywhere, large and small, in 2 dimensions and 3, following strict geometric rules or going with the flow of nature.